That was the Jackson 5 with Rockin' Robin. Unfortunately, I couldn't get clearance to play Brave Sir Robin, so I hope you enjoyed that anyway, Rob. Today we are talking about a few different topics, and we're going to start off with a trope. For the uninitiated, tropes are familiar patterns within pop culture, such as films, TV shows, songs, which repeat themselves. And today we're talking about one called The Trailer Always Lies. Have you ever seen a trailer for a film and thought, well, that looks like a good movie, but when you watch the actual one, it's nothing like it was presented? This is known as The Trailer Always Lies. They say that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and perhaps by extension you shouldn't judge a film by its trailer. But surely a book's cover and a film's trailer, particularly in this day and age, what are you to try and persuade you to buy the book or watch the movie? You absolutely should judge a book by its cover. They spend thousands of pounds on marketing books to people with their covers. They spend thousands of pounds marketing movies via their trailers, and that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes this morning. One movie in particular which did this to me was a movie called Kick-Ass, and if you haven't seen it, I'll try and keep it as spoiler-free as I can. Maybe it was my own critical research failure, which led in part to my massive disappointment with this film. But not being familiar with the comic book, when I watched the trailer, it was presented as a up-to-date Mystery Men, the kind of movie that's about comic book heroes in the real world trying to muddle their way through and be heroes and emulate the people that they admire. But unfortunately, it's not that kind of movie. It's an extremely violent movie, and judge me if you may for not having read the comic book first, and it's a bit shameful since I'm a lifelong comic book reader, but I was really surprised by how violent it was, and it wasn't at all like it was presented on the trailer. Not to say that a movie that keeps surprises from you is bad. The Empire Strikes Back, for example, didn't use Yoda in any of the promotional material. It kept his role as a complete surprise for the audiences. And the movie that did this was the movie Dusk Till Dawn. Halfway plot switch, starts off, well, spoilers, this is a 20-year-old movie, and yes, it's been 20 years since Dusk Till Dawn came out. It starts off as a heist and kidnapping movie, and it turns into a vampire film halfway through. And this kind of bait and switch can be fun, it can be interesting, but lying a bit too much and misleading, that's not as great. Another film that did this is a film called Now You See Me, which is a relatively recent film, and that was presented as a sort of Ocean's 11 with magicians. It's a heist movie, but they're magicians, and let me tell you, it's not Ocean's 11 with magicians. It's dull. Bridge to Deribithia, that's another one, and that's probably the worst offender. If you've never seen the movie because the trailer put you off, and this is the reason I put off watching the movie as well, the trailer sort of comes across as a whimsical Harry Potter-esque rip-off with a little bit of Narnia thrown in. But if you've not seen it, spoiler alert, it's not that at all. It's a story about two little kids and the cute little girl dies, and the rest of the movie is about the little boy trying to deal with her horrific death. Needless to say, the rug was pulled out completely with me on that one. So I want to know, has this ever happened to you? Has a trailer blatantly lied to you about the kind of movie you were going to see? Have you ever been completely disappointed by a movie you thought you were going to see something completely different to what you ended up seeing? I'll read your comments this week or next week, even if you missed the deadline for today. Email me at paulab@ignitionradio.co.uk. If you have a UK phone number and are available for a call between 1pm and 2pm GMT, then I can call you live too, and you can call in the studio at 01642 645 827. And now I'm going to play a song for my friend, and I hope he likes the song he requested. That was Rebecca Black and Friday. I hope you enjoyed that song. Those of you who requested it, you know who you are. So we are living in a golden age of comic book movies. We are having a massive resurgence. The last time that comic books were this popular, it was a fairly long time ago, and as a lifelong comic book reader, I could not be happier. My mother does question that I have to have as many t-shirts that I own with Iron Man's face on it. Yes, Mother, yes, I do need to own that many t-shirts with Iron Man's face on it. So in Marvel movies, of course, Deadpool came out last week. And of course I was there on the first day it was out. Deadpool, if you're not familiar, he started as a character in the X-Men comics with Cable, who is the son of Jean Grey and Scott Summers. And Deadpool sort of took on a life of his own. He became incredibly popular without ever having been connected to any of the cartoons or video games. And it's only been in the last couple of years where he's been in Ultimate Spider-Man, I think it was, and he's had his own game, and now his movies come out, and Ryan Reynolds was pretty much the driving force behind it being moved forward, because Ryan Reynolds himself is a huge Deadpool fan, and any one of you who's already seen the movie, let's say, like, Ryan Reynolds was born to play this part. I review every movie that I watch, even if it's just for myself, and I always give them a score out of 10, and I give Deadpool a 9.5 out of 10. It's pretty much heading towards the top 3 of my top 10 for this year. The only reason I'm not giving it a firm number 1 spot is because the Warcraft movie is due out this year, and Civil War is due out this year, and no, I'm not picking a side. Captain America, Iron Man, you can't make me choose, and I'm not going to choose. I'm just going to go and watch the movie, and like many of my fellow internet citizens, hope that it ends with Captain America and Iron Man naked in a hot tub together. Well, okay, it's a niche market of us that are hoping for that ending of the movie, but you never know, it could happen. I think Robert Downey Jr. would be down with that. So Deadpool. Deadpool was incredibly funny. The whole audience laughed all the way through from the start to the end. It's definitely not a movie for kids. Remember what Captain America says, Deadpool is not for kids, stay away from Deadpool. It's a great movie, really funny, really action-packed, very original. Moments taken directly out of the comic book. Those fans who've read it, they will recognise straight away. Those who've not read it, maybe it's an incentive to get started. And because I'm a lifelong comic reader, a lot of my friends ask me, how do I get started in comic books? And it's a legitimate question. If you've never picked up a comic book before and you walk into a comic book shop and try to figure out how you're going to start with all of these books and all of the history, then it can be very intimidating. But the best thing I find to do is to talk to friends who've already read comics, talk to the people who work in the shop who've already read them, who know what the comics are like, and start with characters that you're already familiar with when you start off. So when I started in comics, I was very young, and it was a Spider-Man comic which got my attention. I'd already been a fan of the 60s cartoon. The 90s cartoon didn't exist yet. We're talking about the 1980s here. And the Nicholas Hammond TV series and movies from the 1970s, as gloriously cheesy as that show was, I loved every second of it. And it made me want to read the comic books. And so when I saw a Spider-Man comic book in a shop, I said to my mum, can I have that, please? And she bought me it. And I've never stopped reading comic books since. I've always been a Marvel zombie, and more recently moved into DC Comics. It helps that I've got an interest in things like Red Sonja and Quantum and Woody, which if you haven't read, check them out, they're awesome. But back to Deadpool. If you want to start reading the Deadpool comics, then I have some recommendations. Go on Amazon, type in Deadpool BFF Team Up and select a comic book with Thor on the cover. You will there get a collection of stories where Deadpool teams up with other characters from the Marvel Universe. One of them is Thor. It's a really funny story. The other one that's absolutely brilliant in that collection is when Deadpool teams up with Bessie the Vampiric Cow. That is a cow that is a vampire, and Deadpool goes on an adventure with her. You just have to read the book, trust me. And if you're already a Deadpool initiate and want to check out something maybe a bit similar but not quite the same, try Ambush Bug Year Zero. Now that's a DC title. Not many people have heard of Ambush Bug, but Ambush Bug is the DC equivalent to Deadpool. Not in the assassin type of way, obviously. That's Slade Wilson. Let's not get into that argument. But Ambush Bug is completely insane. And if you are a Deadpool fan, you're going to like Ambush Bug. So it's currently 69 days until Game of Thrones. So how about we play The Bear and the Maiden Fair and the Reigns of Castamere? That was The Bear and the Maiden Fair and the Reigns of Castamere. 69 days until Game of Thrones. Oh, I cannot wait until Season 6 starts. Because, like many people out there, I've not read the books. Well, at least I hadn't when the series started. When I eventually got around to reading the books, I got as far as Clash of Kings before becoming incredibly bored of the books. And I just decided to watch the show instead because season 3 was fantastic. I watched every episode at least twice in a row and did not do that with the books because they were not at all the same. And it's been incredibly annoying for those of us who haven't read all the books to sort of see the smug face of the book readers whenever something really shocking happened. Even people like me who can't wait for spoilers sometimes and may have read ahead on Wikipedia as to what was happening in the books. So now we're getting into nobody knows territory. We've surpassed the books. We've surpassed what's known in most of the storylines of the main characters. There's only a few, I believe, that haven't been overtaken by the TV show now. And I know that the whole Sansa Stark season 5 storyline was a bit controversial. Don't want to get into too many spoilers at the moment, so won't talk about that. But I'm really looking forward to season 6, not just because we don't know what's happening, but because it's a great show and it's got a brilliant cast, it's brilliant production, and I just can't praise it high enough. I love that show. So, on Ignition Radio this morning, if you would like to comment about some of the things that we've been talking about, you can call into the studio. It's 01642 645 827. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can email me, paulab@ignitionradio.co.uk. You can also follow me on Instagram, Airtime of the Geek, or you can contact me on Twitter, which is @AirtimeGeek. And I have retweets from both Les and from the main Ignition Radio site. So, now I'm going to play a bit of Black Sabbath, Iron Man, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking about some of my top 10s. That was Black Sabbath playing Iron Man, and one of our lovely admin ladies in our office, Maureen, asked if it was black lace. No, Maureen, it's not black lace, but here's a bit of black lace just... So that was Black Lace, Superman, and that was just for Maureen, who I think was waving a finger at me earlier on for saying that on the radio. Who was delayed by the snow this morning? I set off at 8:30. Well, I was on the bus at 8:30 this morning. Didn't get into work until about 11:15. Pretty much everyone in our office was late. And one of the things I planned on doing today was a top 10 of my favourite films with the music to go alongside them. And as I was downloading some of them last night, my internet was really slow, and I thought, you know what? I'll get into work really early. I've got plenty of time. I can sit on the computer. I can download these songs, put them on my memory stick. I'll have no problem. And I got in late. We had interviews this morning, and I just did not have time to prepare the music. So next week, I'll be a lot more prepared. I will download the songs today for next week. And what I'm just going to talk about is my top 10 movies of odd or TV shows where the antagonist is more interesting than the hero. Not necessarily the overall villain of the piece, but someone who is counter to the hero, who's just more interesting. And number 10, Freddy Krueger. And he's from the Nightmare on Elm Street film series. And with the exception of Nancy, because let's face it, Dream Warriors was an epic film, no one really cares that much who the protagonists are in a Freddy Krueger film. You watch the movie to see Robert Englund be evil and awesome and make smarty pants comments all the way through the movie as he kills people. That's what people want to see. That's why the remake didn't work, because what people wanted to see was what they were getting, which was Robert Englund being a bit cheesy, a bit sarky, and killing people, and they made a terrible, terrible mess of it. Robert Englund carried the franchise, and Freddy Krueger was a mysterious figure. We only learned just enough about him, never too much, because ultimately when you carry a franchise, when you've got a villain carrying the franchise, you have to make your villain likeable, even if he's murdering people. And Platinum Dunes, again, note to you, you do not come out and say that your main character is a child molester, because your audience therefore cannot cheer for that character. You can cheer for Robert Englund's character. He's just a child murderer. Not that I'm condoning child murder, but there's only so much that an audience can legitimately put in their mind to one side so that they can watch a villain carry a franchise. Number 9 is the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. And yes, I know they're not officially called Xenomorphs, those of you who are extreme fans, but that's what most people know them by, so that's what I'm calling them. Now, ignoring the extra information provided by Ridley Scott and the Aliens books and Prometheus, let's not even talk about Prometheus, the only information provided within the films is very little. We only know what the characters learn about the aliens. We have no idea where they come from. We don't know who made them. We don't know why they were made. We don't know why a species with advanced tech as the kind of bioengineering which produced the xenomorphs has completely disappeared. Yeah, the books do go into some of this, and let's again ignore Prometheus. Let's just look at the canon films. Aliens, Alien 3, let's forget about Resurrection as well, actually, while we're at it. But in the books, you know, there's an explanation that the space jockeys, the aliens who created the xenomorphs, and that's the skeleton that you see in Prometheus as well. But as much as, like, the franchise is about Ripley, if the alien Ripley was fighting anything but a mysterious xenomorph, would there have been sequels? Probably not. I think what Ridley Scott created was something really original, and it was something really interesting, and interesting enough to carry on the film franchise for many years. And number 8, my 8th antagonist, who is more interesting than the protagonist, the Sheriff of Nottingham from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And sadly, we've lost the great Alan Rickman now. And I rewatched this film very recently with the special features added, the special extra footage added back into the movie, which was another extra 12 minutes of Alan Rickman, and it was glorious. So if you have not seen this cut of the movie, I suggest you go out and you find it and you watch it straight away, because it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves is not a great film. Robin Hood was not great, but Alan Rickman was awesome. Rickman won the BAFTA for the role, and even though Robin Hood Men in Tights didn't directly mock his performance, though it's a hilarious movie, that was the only part of that movie that they didn't mock. When you've got a blatantly American Robin Hood and Will Scarlet and Friar Tuck and a Scottish King Richard, Rickman was left to head up the English performances. And to be fair, you know, the other actors' accents were pretty acceptable, and yes, I know that modern English accents, it's just when you are a modern English person, this is what you expect to hear. So, you know, without a Prince John character, he was running the show, and I think the film's a lot better for it, because instead of splitting his screen time between him and another character, he gets to walk around eating the scenery, and if you enjoyed it in the original cut, check out the extended edition. You will not regret it. You know, my number 7 is Dr. Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. And I'm not counting Dr. Hannibal Lecter from the TV show Hannibal, because it's called Hannibal and it's about Hannibal. So he doesn't classed as an antagonist, he's the protagonist of that show. So Silence of the Lambs specifically, we're talking about. You might have heard that trivia fact about Anthony Hopkins winning the Oscar for only 17 minutes of screen time. Actually, it's not quite true. It's 17 minutes of speaking time. And he actually appears for about 25 minutes, but that doesn't sound quite as impressive. The character was so interesting that Tom Harris wrote Hannibal with more focus on Lecter, and the book was quite good if you haven't read it. Spoiler alert for a book that came out a very long time ago. In the end of Hannibal, Clarice actually runs off with Hannibal Lecter and they travel the world together. Don't watch the film version, but read the book. Now, number 6 is a character from one of my favourite films of all time, Annie Wilkes from Misery. I'll say the film version rather than the book, because in the book it's narrated from Paul Sheldon, the writer's perspective, and he's actually a lot more interesting than his film counterpart. But there's a reason why Kathy Bates won the Oscar for this role, and she took that character of Annie Wilkes and she made it iconic. She starts off really sweet, a little awkward, she seems caring and humble, and slowly you see those cracks start to appear, and she's just such a fantastic actress. There's no wonder that she won the award for playing that role. Now, we're going to play one little song, and then we're going to do my top 5. And the song I'm going to play is Feeling Good on a Wednesday. That was Feeling Good on a Wednesday because it's a song that I just enjoy listening to. So you're here listening to Airtime of the Geek with Paula on Ignition Radio. And if you want to write in with any comments about the things we've been talking about today, or any of your own suggestions that you'd like to hear talked about, you have to email me at paulab@ignitionradio.co.uk. You can phone in the studio 01642 645 827. You can get in touch with me on Instagram, Airtime of the Geek, or you can get in touch with me on Twitter at Airtime Geek. Now, I was talking about my top 10 antagonists who are more interesting than protagonists, and my number 5 is the character of Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and really his counterpart is Angel, and it's him I'm comparing him to. As Angel starts off life when he was human as a drunkard who abuses the household staff, steals from his own family, gets thrown out of pubs, and he meets Darla, becomes Angelus, and he just enjoys killing everything and anyone in sight. He's even worse as a vampire. The first people he kills is his own family, his neighbours, their families. He enjoys torturing people to the point of madness. He's a bad man, a very bad man. And it's only when Angelus is cursed with a soul does he start to behave. Well, not even at first. He still hangs out with his vampire gang for a bit, that we find out. And eventually he tries living amongst humans, becomes homeless, and doesn't do anything useful until Buffy's made into a slayer. The soul is the only thing keeping Angel in check, and the second he loses it, he reverts to Angelus and starts trying to kill everyone again. Without a soul, Angel's a sadistic killer. But Spike starts life as a sensitive poet who loves a woman who doesn't love him. He's terrible at writing poetry, but he loves his mother. She indulges him, but she's dying, of course, of the very common blood from the mouth syndrome, as many TV characters suffer from. And after being rejected, he bumps into the vampire who turns him. His first act is to turn his mother into a vampire so that he can take her with him. And, of course, Spike eventually becomes a good man when he moves to Sunnydale after falling in love, and even though he doesn't have a soul, he tries to do good things. And when Spike tries to get his own soul, because being good on his own isn't enough, the whole trial nearly kills him, and it drives it almost insane with guilt when he gets his own soul. And then he sacrifices himself to save the world. So without a soul, Spike is still a good man, and still a better man than Angel ever was. So I think we can quite agree that Spike is the much better character, far more interesting. And let's completely ignore everything that happened in the comic books, because the comic books are just wrong and icky and made of squick. So number 4. Number 4 is Draco from Harry Potter. Now, Draco, the reason that the fans love him is that it's basically J.K. Rowling's fault. She spectacularly failed with her author intent. She intended him to be a slimy, disliked character. But around the time that Goblet of Fire came around, being Slytherin had really started to become popular because, unintentionally, she'd turned the Slytherins into the underdogs. Harry is an invincible hero. From the moment he arrives at Hogwarts, the Gryffindors win everything, no matter how hard the other houses work, because Slytherins constantly treat as like the scum of the universe, without very good reason, I might add. They started to gain a lot of sympathy from the fans, and Rowling was under the misconception that it was all down to Tom Felton, but it wasn't even true. There was lots of Slytherin fans who were just in it because they thought, well, here the Slytherins are at the end of the first year, they've worked hard to get all of these house points, and Gryffindor are hundreds and hundreds of points behind, and Dumbledore sort of comes in, hands out them just enough points to make the Gryffindors win. And it's not through the Gryffindors' hard work, it's because Dumbledore's favourite pupil happened to be in that. It's spectacularly unfair, as I think we can all agree. My number 3 character is the character of Gul Dukat from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And if this was my top 10 villains list, Dukat would probably straight be at number 1, because historically speaking, Star Trek's not had that many recurring villains, 1 or 2, who would appear in a couple of episodes over the course of a show, but never had a lot of them. Due to the exploration nature of the show, and then because Deep Space Nine was stationary, it allowed for a lot more recurring characters, including recurring villains. And the main cast of DS9 were extremely well developed, but Gul Dukat was just as good and just as well developed as any of the primary protagonists. I mean, originally he was only intended to appear in the pilot episode, but the writers liked him so much they kept bringing him back, and because Mark Alamo's very long neck was the reason that the Cardassians' neck makeup was designed that way, is they just kept bringing him back over and over, and we saw everything with that character. We saw his highs, his lows, his descent into insanity. We almost never saw his next move coming. And my personal favourite for Dukat was the relationship that he had with his daughter Tora when he started out with the intent to murder his own daughter and found that he simply couldn't bring himself to do it. And even though he knew he would sacrifice his relationship with his family, took her home anyway. And the character went through a big arc, and I think he was one of the most well-written villains that there is. Now, my number 2, most people won't have heard of. He's a character from a mini-series on the BBC called Gormenghast, which only I watched, I think, and maybe the people who were in it. And the character is Steerpike, and he is played by the very pretty Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. There's a quote I found about Steerpike on the internet, which I really enjoy, which is, "Steerpike is possibly the only character in literature who never makes a single unambiguously truthful statement." For those who are unfamiliar, I'll just give you a bit of background. Gormenghast is a 5-mile castle, and it's very old and decrepit and crumbling. It's sort of almost high fantasy if there's no magic in it, if that makes any sense. And Steerpike is this kitchen boy who starts working his ways up the ranks, and I don't want to spoil anything because I am of a firm belief that everyone should watch Gormenghast and enjoy it completely. So I'm going to leave you to just look it up, watch it. It's only 4 episodes long, but it's absolutely fantastic and I highly recommend it. Now, my number 1 antagonist, who's more interesting than the protagonists, is Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, the TV series, not the movie. Not M. Night Shyamalan. Please don't even mention his name to me. Obviously the main character is Aang, and he gets the most screen time, but without a doubt, Zuko's the best character in the show. Throughout the 3 seasons of the show, Aang uses the 4 elements. That's what he learns, and he has some adventures, and he has some ups and downs and little fights, but being the Avatar and being the main character doesn't automatically make you interesting. Zuko is interesting. He's a banished prince. He is tasked with a mission given to him by his father that was designed to be impossible. His father physically abused him. He's on a redemption arc to try and regain his honour. He's betrayed by his sister. He's betrayed by his father. He's thrown into prison. He lives as a peasant. He restarts his life and eventually tries going back to his family, realises that he's miserable with them and decides he's going to team up with the good guys in the end. And he's all at the age of 15 when this happens. Personally speaking, he's one of the most interesting characters probably in TV shows I've ever seen. He's interesting because there's conflict, and conflict is interesting. And even though his story is downplayed, I think it worked out for the better that Aang was the main character, because then you weren't overusing the character of Zuko, who was, let's face it, he was the best. So I'm going to take a little break and play you a song which Les wouldn't play for me earlier because he's a big meanie pants, and then we're going to talk about some of the promotions we're running at the minute on Ignition Radio. That was Last Ketchup and the Ketchup Song, which Les wouldn't play for me earlier. How mean is that? Now, this is Airtime of the Geek. It's going to be a weekly feature here at Ignition Radio. It's going out live 1 p.m. GMT, and it's going to be repeated 1 a.m. GMT, so that's technically a Tuesday morning, but it will be played if you're living in America at 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, and we're also going to repeat it on YouTube. Most weeks we're hoping to get it up by the Tuesday at the latest, but obviously we can't play the music in the YouTube version. So if you'd like to get in touch and you'd like to talk, or you'd like to make a comment or a suggestion or something, or if you're my good friend Rob, who tried phoning me while I was on air, you have the number to call. It's 01642 645 827. You can follow me on Instagram, Airtime of the Geek. You can get in touch with me via Twitter, at Airtime Geek, and email me, Paula B, at ignitionradio.co.uk. We have a £10 voucher to give away for either the 6 medals in Middlesbrough, the Voyager in Gisborough, or the Mighton in Ingleby Barwick, courtesy of Marston's Breweries. All you have to do is email studio@ignitionradio.co.uk with your name, your number, and the choice of which pub, or you can call into Ignition Radio 01642 645 827. We draw it every Friday, and unfortunately it is just for those 3 pubs. We can't make an exchange, so if you live further afield, I'm afraid we can't transfer the vouchers. So we are just about at the end of my hour now, and I'm just going to say thank you very much for listening in today, and I'm going to play trumpets, and I will see you next week.